So several months ago, I was really inspired by this video made by a guy named Bo Miles, who is an outdoor educator and YouTuber based in Australia. And he made a video about creating a canoe paddle entirely out of junk and scrap wood that he found along the side of the road.
I walk this a couple of times a week, and I reckon it's going to be full of usable paddle-making wood. The hardest bit, I reckon, is going to be finding a paddle shaft.
I think he was proving a point about good craftsmanship being more about resourcefulness and ingenuity and less about having access to great materials and tools. I had been wanting to make a pair of canoe paddles for a really long time, but admittedly I was just, I guess, too intimidated to start. And his sort of just do it attitude was like exactly the kick in the pants that I needed. And my partner had a birthday coming up, so I realized, like, you know, this would be a really perfect symbolic gift, and that was a pretty good motivator too. Once I got started, I became lost in the process in the best possible way. The whole thing sort of turned into this reflection or meditation, I guess, on how paddle making is a lot like building relationships. And by that I mean the sort of relationships that you build with yourself and your friends and family and lovers, all kinds of relationships. Now, before I get into explaining this, full disclosure, this entire video is going to rest on somewhat of a mixed metaphor. So if that's not your thing, I'm not sorry. While working on this project, I was reading a book called Start Where You Are by Pema Chodron. She's an American Buddhist nun whose whole bag is more or less about radical acceptance. And in this book, she makes a really incredible argument that compassion and connection with others begins by forming compassion and connection with oneself. In the 6th chapter, Chodron explains a Buddhist meditation practice called Tonglen, which provides good support for developing this kind of compassion and connectivity. To be honest, while I was reading about this, I had my doubts as to whether or not I was cut out for this kind of hardcore practice. I'm not a Buddhist ascetic. I am just your average, easily distracted millennial YouTuber. But there's this amazing paragraph in there that completely wiped all my doubt off the table. I'm gonna read it to you. Start where you are. This is very important. Tonglen practice, and all meditation practice, is not about later, when you get it all together and you're this person you really respect. You may be the most violent person in the world. That's a fine place to start. That's a very rich place to start. Juicy, smelly. You might be the most depressed person in the world, the most addicted person in the world, the most jealous person in the world. You might think that there are no other people on the planet who hate themselves as much as you do. All of that is a good place to start. Just where you are, that's the place to start. Reading this, I found something about her word choice to be really profound. She pretty brilliantly undercut all the voices in my head that say, you can't do that, you don't know how, they don't need you, don't bother. These voices that come from depression, self-doubt, contempt, jealousy, addiction, all these sort of root feelings and experiences. These are the voices that I think prevent all of us from opening up and creating healthy, intimate relationships with ourselves and others. So when it came to making these paddles, I was really hung up on this idea, this disarming idea that if I couldn't do it perfectly, I shouldn't do it at all, which is ridiculous. This is where I think that paddling and relationship building have a lot in common. You know, with every new adventure, you're kind of walking out on a limb. You don't know what's going to happen. That's kind of the beauty of it. And so there's this underlying question I think a lot of us have, which is, what if it doesn't work out? Or what if things don't go as we planned? Or what if it all falls apart? When two people get out on the river together, you know, this long, unending stream of water, the vastness and unpredictability can be somewhat overwhelming. There are no road signs, no lanes. The river is changing shape all the time. The current can pick up without warning. And a lot of times what sits below the surface can be really dangerous. River tripping is full of surprises. Just like entering into a new friendship or relationship, it's ultimately gonna lead you to experience some kind of vulnerability. I guess the correlation that I'm seeing across all of this is that getting to know a new person or process is messy, but starting is the important part. So that's what I did. I got started. Several other paddle making videos I watched referenced this book, which it turns out is pretty much a comprehensive Bible on the process. After a little homework, I laid out a design and I got to work. For this particular set of paddles, each was made from the same 5 trees, each segment of each species split in half: ash, walnut, cherry, maple, and Douglas fir. That was the 2x4 I found in my alley. This whole project became very devotional very quickly. You know, making a pair of paddles, one for you, one for your partner, is pretty hit you over the head symbolic. And frankly, it felt really good to lean into that. Making these felt a lot like building a relationship. You look at a block of wood, you see the potential, and from there, the only way to get to a paddle is to carve out a little at a time with a general vision of what you want the end result to look like. There is no cookie cutter router shortcut that can just deliver you perfection. You're definitely gonna encounter some knots and changes in grain direction along the way. Sometimes you'll royally screw something up and have to painstakingly scrape epoxy resin off your wood 3 times. Shaping something by hand is a long, laborious process. That's the beauty of it. Though let's be real, sometimes you just have to buy a PowerPoint on eBay to get the job done. Learning new tools, improvising, iterating, that's what it's all about. You have to freestyle. It's not something that can be planned out, only discovered. Of course, once you finish making something like this, you realize that the hard work has only just begun in many ways. Steering a boat with 2 wooden sticks that are moving independently of one another can be difficult. It requires so much communication and trust and confidence. But I think that what I've ultimately learned is that the key to getting two separate things to work together is exactly that. It's honoring their separateness. Being willing to start where you are, from that place of individuality, and slowly build interdependence. Two paddles working together. So the original plan involved giving this gift at the start of a multi-day canoe trip in Missouri, but we ended up revising that, and instead I flew out to Austin to meet her for a Texas water world adventure. I landed in Austin at like 8 that morning, and straight away we got in the car and drove to Mustang Island at Corpus Christi so that we could camp on the beach. Despite there being no boating to speak of in this equation, it seemed like a good time to unveil this gift, which went over pretty well. After getting back to the city and biking around Austin for a bit, we were finally able to put the paddle to the test and put a boat in Lady Bird Lake. This was our first time in a canoe together, and turns out we're pretty good at it. Which I guess comes as no surprise because most things with her just feel easy. Learning something new, getting two separate things coordinated, it's complex, it's messy. But I think this is where the magic happens. When we trust in ourselves and in others to get us from point A to point B, we get in the water, we start where we are, and we figure it out. This thing is like a clamping nightmare. Let's count them. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. And I think I'm gonna have to put a few more of these wooden clamps on the back here to make sure there's even pressure. I pretty much did exactly what I tell my students not to do, which is don't get the glue out until you have a plan for clamping. And here we are.